AITA for taking back my diamond ring after my girlfriend humiliated me at Christmas. I was in my future in-laws' living room on Christmas Day, with grease still under my fingernails from working on my Challenger's suspension, when my fiancée looked me straight in the eye and delivered her line. But here's the thing. I had been planning my exit for 2 months, and what she didn't know was that every insult she threw at me that night was just digging a deeper hole for herself, because I had proof of everything. My name is Cole, and I'm 32. I fix heavy machinery for a living. I box 3 times a week, and I've been restoring a 1973 Dodge Challenger since I was 25. And yes, that car was about to save me in ways you wouldn't believe. Brielle and I had been together for 3 years, engaged for 8 months. If you had asked me 2 years ago, I would have said she was the one, because back then she was funny and ambitious and made me want to be better. We had agreed to split all wedding costs 50-50. It seemed fair, since we both worked full-time. But every single invoice, the venue deposit, the caterer, the photographer's down payment, somehow ended up on my credit card, because Brielle never had the money on hand. Despite earning a decent income as a marketing coordinator, she lived like she earned twice as much, always with fresh nails, new clothes, and weekend brunches at places that charge $18 for avocado toast. But when it came time to pay her share of the wedding expenses, she was suddenly broke. And if I couldn't cover it, she'd pay me back next month. Next month never came. And every time I brought it up, she would turn it into an attack on my character, telling me I was cheap or that I didn't really love her if I was counting pennies. After months of this, I started feeling crazy, like maybe I was the problem. My best friend, Evan, who I've known since high school and who documents everything like he's prepping for the apocalypse, started keeping detailed records after I mentioned the 3rd time Brielle dodged a payment. By November, he had calculated that I had covered about $11,000 in wedding expenses that were supposed to be shared. On top of that, I was still paying for 2/3 of our dates. Evan screenshots everything, saves email chains, photographs receipts, and organizes it all into color-coded folders. I used to joke that he was paranoid, but that habit was about to save my future. The red flags became clearer in October when Brielle started getting secretive with her phone, angling the screen away, and taking calls in another room. After 3 years together, you notice when behavior changes. I mentioned it to Evan over a beer, and he calmly suggested I start keeping my own records of every expense, every conversation about money, and every promise she made, just in case things went south. I did that for 8 straight weeks leading up to Christmas, documenting everything while acting normal on the surface. The invitation for Christmas dinner came in mid-December, with Brielle insisting I had to be there because her mom wanted to discuss wedding details. I said, of course. I finished a shift early, spent 2 hours swapping out the Challenger's front suspension because the old parts were shot, cleaned myself up, and headed to her parents' house around 3 p.m. The second I walked in, I knew something was wrong. The house looked picture perfect. A tree with expensive, matching ornaments, mulled wine on the stove, Christmas music playing, and presents piled high. But the people felt cold. Her mom barely looked at me. Her dad gave me a weird, tight smile. Her sister, Sienna, was fiddling with her phone, and Brielle was glued to her own screen with a smug little smirk, typing like she was live tweeting her own ambush. We sat down for dinner, and for 20 painful minutes, everything was aggressively normal, passing platters, small talk about Christmas shopping, her dad asking about work, but you could feel the tension building. Then, Sienna mentioned honeymoon destinations, and Brielle's whole demeanor switched into attack mode. She launched into a speech about how I wasn't pulling my weight financially, how I cared more about that stupid car than our future, and how she was tired of being with someone with no ambition who spent every free hour in a garage covered in motor oil. Her family just sat there as if they had been briefed beforehand, like I was walking into a play where everyone knew their lines but me. Then Brielle stood up, raising her wine glass like she was making a toast, and said she was done with a man with no drive, that she didn't need someone who lived in a garage. And then she dropped the bomb. There were men out there who actually knew what they wanted in life. Men like Tristan. Sienna's face went white. Her dad's fork clattered onto his plate. Her mom just stared into her wine, and I realized her mom knew about the inappropriate relationship. But Sienna and her dad were hearing this for the first time, just like me. But Brielle wasn't finished. She tore off her engagement ring, the one I had worked 2 months of overtime for, and threw it at me so hard it bounced off my chest and hit the floor with a metallic clink. She said it was cheap, just like everything I did, and then she delivered what was supposed to be the final blow. She looked right at me and said, "I'll be over you in a week." I practically already am. On Christmas Day, in front of her family, she had just destroyed our 3-year relationship and announced she had been involved with some guy named Tristan. The most absurd part is that I suspected something, but I wasn't sure until that moment. I stood up slowly. For about 5 seconds, I felt rage. But then a strange calm washed over me. Because she had just done exactly what Evan and I had half expected. She had created a major scene in front of witnesses and handed me everything I needed. I bent down, picked the ring up off the floor, took the copy of my apartment key she had from my pocket, and placed it on the table. I looked at her dad and said, "Thank you for having me. I'm sorry it ended like this." Then I walked out while Brielle started screaming something I couldn't hear. I sat in my car for 10 seconds and sent a text to Evan. It happened. She blew it all up. Initiating protocol now. And I drove to his place while my phone exploded with messages from Brielle that, in the span of 15 minutes, went from angry to confused and then to panicked. Evan opened the door, took one look at my face, and said, "She really did it?" I just nodded as he grabbed his laptop, because we both knew what came next. You see, I had spent 8 weeks preparing for this exact moment. Not because I wanted it to end, but because I started to recognize the financial manipulation and emotional gaslighting that Evan had helped me document. Every time I mentioned the lopsided expenses, she would attack my character. After months of that, I felt like I was losing my mind. But Evan convinced me to save everything: screenshots, bank statements, emails, and audio recordings, just in case things imploded and I needed proof that I wasn't crazy. That night, sitting in Evan's apartment as he pulled up folders of meticulously organized evidence, I felt a strange calm. Because for the first time in months, I wasn't confused or second-guessing myself. I could see the whole pattern in black and white, and I knew exactly what came next. The morning after Christmas, I woke up on Evan's couch to 23 missed calls from Brielle and about 50 text messages that started with apologies around midnight, turned into accusations at 3 a.m., and devolved into incoherent ramblings by sunrise. The first thing I did was change all the locks on my apartment, because she had had that spare key for months. Evan was already up, sitting at his kitchen table with his laptop and 3 highlighters lined up like surgical instruments. He looked up with grim satisfaction and said we had everything we needed to dismantle her narrative. The plan was straightforward but thorough. Block Brielle everywhere. Update emergency contacts at work and on my insurance to remove her. Begin the systematic process of canceling with wedding vendors. And most critically, conduct a full financial audit of every dollar I had spent that was supposed to have been split 50-50. Evan had created a detailed spreadsheet, breaking down every wedding expense by vendor, date, amount, and who was contractually responsible for payment. Seeing 3 years of imbalance laid out was genuinely shocking. I had been paying in bits and pieces and hadn't realized how lopsided it had all become. The venue deposit alone, for $1,500, was entirely from my account. The caterer, $3,200. The photographer, $500, plus probably 15 smaller expenses, adding up to way beyond my fair share. I started making calls that afternoon, and here's a useful thing most people don't know. Many wedding vendors have reasonable cancellation policies if you're outside certain deadlines. Since our wedding wasn't until early June and it was December, I was in the refund zone. The venue gave back $3,000 of the $4,500. The caterer refunded $2,400 of the $3,200. The photographer kept the deposit, as per the contract. In total, I got back about $4,350. Then, 2 weeks after Christmas, just when I thought the refund process was over, the venue coordinator called with an uncomfortable tone in her voice. Apparently, Brielle had contacted them, claiming I had stolen her identity to cancel, that she had never agreed to it, and they had frozen my refund pending an investigation. I just sat there staring at my phone, processing that she was actively sabotaging my ability to get back the money I had paid. That's when I realized this wasn't a clean break. This was going to be difficult. Evan was over in 20 minutes. We spent 3 hours documenting that all payments came from my accounts with my signatures, including emails proving I was the sole point of contact. We went to the venue the next morning, showed them all the evidence, and they unfroze the refund within an hour. But that whole episode showed me one thing. Brielle was not moving on. She was determined to make this as complicated as possible. The engagement ring was trickier since custom jewelry can't be returned. But I had worked with the jeweler, Victor, for years, and he bought it back for 60% of its value, putting another chunk of change back in my pocket. As Evan and I went through our joint expenses with forensic detail, we found that Brielle had racked up spending that was supposed to be shared, where she had promised to pay half, but never did. The engagement party, where she insisted on expensive wines. The venue visit weekend, where she upgraded our hotel without asking. Other situations where she made money-costing decisions and then developed amnesia about reimbursing me. Evan suggested small claims court. I hesitated because part of me just wanted it to be over. But then I remembered her blocking the venue refund and realized she wasn't going to let this end quietly. We built what Evan called the Bible of evidence. Bank statements, screenshots of texts with promises to pay, ignored Venmo requests, and complete expense breakdowns, all organized with tabs and an index. The filing fee was $75, and the court date was set for early March. Meanwhile, Brielle's behavior escalated from annoying to genuinely concerning. The regretful Christmas texts disappeared by the 27th, replaced by accusations that I had humiliated her. By New Year's Eve, she was sending long texts about how I had ruined her life, how her family was disappointed in her, her sister wasn't speaking to her, and somehow it was all my fault for not fighting for our relationship after she announced her own poor choices. She called from different numbers after I blocked her. She showed up at my gym twice until the staff asked her not to return. She drove past my apartment so many times my neighbor commented on seeing her car. She tried to get into my workplace, claiming she needed to drop something off. I documented it all: screenshots, call logs, dates and times of appearances, and witness statements. After the fifth incident, I called the police non-emergency line to ask about creating an official record of harassment. The officer was helpful, said my documentation was solid, and that if the behavior worsened, I had enough grounds for a protective order. In mid-January, Evan came through with something big. Using his social media forensics, he discovered that Brielle's situation wasn't recent. It had been going on for 8 months. Basically, since we got engaged in April. Worse, Evan found credit card statements showing hotel rooms and weekend trips she had claimed were work conferences or girls' weekends, all charged to the joint wedding expense account. She was funding her other relationship with the money that was supposed to be building our future. When Evan showed me those highlighted charges, I felt sick. A trip to Napa in May that she called a marketing conference. A beach hotel in August, supposedly a bachelorette party. A downtown hotel in September, which she claimed was a late dinner with a client. All on the wedding card. I just sat there staring at those charges, and that was the closest I came to completely losing my composure. The financial aspect was one thing, but this felt like a calculated betrayal on another level. Evan asked if I was okay, and for a minute, I couldn't answer. Then I spent 4 hours in my garage replacing the brake lines on the Challenger because I needed something with clear steps and measurable progress. By midnight, I was cold and focused again, but something had shifted. I wasn't just protecting myself anymore. I was going to make sure there was a full accounting. Tristan turned out to be a mid-level sales manager, married with 2 kids, with no intention of leaving his wife, despite whatever he promised Brielle. Evan found Tristan's wife's public Facebook, showing a normal suburban family with soccer games and birthday parties. And from Brielle's increasingly unhinged social media posts, you could see she was starting to realize Tristan had just misled her and was never going to leave his marriage. She had upended her entire life for a guy who wasn't being honest with her the whole time. And watching that realization dawn on her through angry posts about men being untrustworthy was almost satisfying, in a dark way. Around this time, my acquaintance with Marissa turned into something more. She had worked at the local auto parts store for years. We had chatted casually dozens of times, but it was just friendly shop talk. One day, I went in to get seat brackets, and she mentioned she was restoring a 1969 Camaro SS. We talked for 45 minutes about suspension geometry and brake conversions, and I realized I was having the first genuinely relaxed conversation I'd had in months, without calculating who owed what or wondering if I was being manipulated. We got coffee, and I ended up talking for 45 minutes straight about vendor contracts and small claims court prep. I probably ruined any chance of a second date, but Marissa said she had been through a messy breakup where her ex tried to claim he had paid for things she had bought herself, so she got it. She was direct, calm, and knew her stuff. She paid for her own coffee, and being around her felt like the opposite of Brielle's exhausting chaos. We started meeting up at car shows. Then she helped me install the seats in the Challenger. And while neither of us was in a rush, I recognized that this is what healthy felt like. Someone who showed up when they said they would, paid their own way, and didn't need drama to feel alive. Somehow, Brielle found out, and that's when things became very difficult. There's a go-kart place called Velocity Track that our friend group goes to monthly. One Friday in late January, we were there for a birthday when Brielle showed up uninvited, clearly under the influence, storming into the lobby and screaming about how I had baited her and destroyed her life. She pointed at Marissa, calling her names I won't repeat, telling everyone I was seeing someone behind her back, and completely rewriting history. Marissa just looked confused, having only known me for 2 weeks. I was about to try to de-escalate when Brielle grabbed someone's helmet and threw it against the wall so hard it cracked the visor. The manager called the police. They issued her a formal trespass warning, banning her from the premises permanently, and I added it all to the Bible of evidence. My phone buzzed with more messages that night, but I just took screenshots and went back to talking about carburetors with Marissa, while Brielle's life spiraled somewhere outside my concern. The small claims court date fell on a Tuesday morning in early March, one of those gray, end-of-winter days where you can see your breath in the parking lot. I showed up 45 minutes early with Evan, who was carrying a briefcase that looked like it belonged to a corporate lawyer, even though we were arguing over a relatively small sum. Brielle arrived 10 minutes late, wearing her job interview outfit, with dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't hide. She was carrying only a purse with zero documentation. When we were called, she kept trying to make eye contact, as if that would change the outcome. The judge was a woman, probably in her 60s, who looked like she had seen every possible variation of relationship drama and had zero patience for nonsense. She started by asking Brielle if she had any evidence contesting my claim that she owed money for shared expenses she had agreed to split. Brielle launched into a rambling story about how the relationship was complicated and I always earned more, so it wasn't fair to expect equal payment when I knew she was struggling, completely ignoring that she lived beyond her means and her struggles didn't stop her from getting weekly manicures or dining at expensive restaurants. The judge cut her off mid-sentence with a look of profound weariness and asked if she had any bank statements, text messages, or receipts showing she had paid her share. When Brielle admitted she didn't bring any proof because she didn't think she would need documentation for something so obviously unfair, I saw the judge's expression shift from neutral to completely done. Evan and I presented the Bible of evidence. About 40 pages, organized with tabs, highlights, and an index. Probably overkill, but Evan doesn't do things by halves. The judge flipped through it for maybe 3 minutes, nodding occasionally, then looked up and gave her ruling. Brielle owed me $1,325, the original amount plus court costs, payable within 30 days, under penalty of wage garnishment. Brielle's face went white. She started to get up to argue, but the judge just said, "Next case." And that was it. 3 months of drama resolved in an 8-minute hearing. We walked out into the gray morning, and Evan did a small fist pump. I just felt tired and ready to stop thinking about Brielle and actually move on instead of just surviving her chaos. I genuinely thought that would be the end of it, that losing in court would make her realize she needed to move on. But apparently, for some people, humiliation is a catalyst, not a stopping point. The next 3 weeks were relatively quiet, in a way that felt ominous. Like the calm before a storm you know is coming but can't see. She paid the debt in 2 installments right before the deadline. Her social media went completely dark. Mutual friends said she had moved back in with her parents. And I started to relax, thinking maybe it was actually over. Marissa and I were spending more time together, working on the Challenger's seats that I had bought with the refund money. Things felt genuinely good for the first time in years, like I was building something real instead of surviving someone else's chaos. Then came the night of March 20th, which I remember specifically because it was the first truly warm night of early spring, that magical night when winter finally breaks. Marissa and I had decided to work late in my garage with the door open, installing the new upholstery we had spent weeks picking out. It was around 10:30 p.m., and we were arguing about seatbelt routing when I heard a car pull up way too fast outside. A slight squeal of tires, and before I could process what was happening, Brielle stumbled into my garage. She was in pajamas and a baggy coat, holding what was clearly a wine bottle, and was obviously intoxicated to the point where she could barely walk a straight line. She immediately started shouting at a volume that probably woke up half my neighborhood. She ranted about how I destroyed her entire life. I had turned her family against her, poisoned all her friends, made everyone think she was the villain, when all she did was develop feelings for someone else. How Tristan had blocked her and his wife had threatened her with a restraining order, and how she had lost him because of me, somehow. How she had lost her apartment application because the landlord found the trespassing incident from the go-kart track on her record. In her mind, all this destruction was my fault for not being man enough to forgive her mistakes and fight for what we had. Marissa just stood there, holding a wrench, with a look of complete bewilderment. I pulled out my phone and calmly called 911, explaining that my ex-fiancé had entered my property without permission, was clearly intoxicated, and I needed officers to come. Brielle kept screaming about how she deserved better, how Marissa was just some cheap fling who couldn't compare to what we had, how I should have fought for our relationship instead of giving up so easily. Completely oblivious to the irony, after having thrown a ring at me on Christmas and announced her long-term affair to her family. The cops showed up in about 8 minutes, which felt like an hour, as Brielle staggered around my garage, getting dangerously close to the Challenger, making me worry she would damage it. The officers who responded handled it perfectly. They asked Brielle to leave in a tone that left no room for argument. They gave her a sobriety test on my driveway, which she didn't pass. They ran her name through the system and found all the previous harassment reports, plus the go-kart incident, and then they arrested her for trespassing and public intoxication. She kept screaming my name as they put her in the squad car, hands secured behind her back, saying I would regret this, that she would never let me forget her, that I ruined both our lives, and a bunch of incoherent, slurred nonsense that probably didn't help her case. Then they drove off with their lights on, and the street was quiet again, just the sound of crickets and distant highway traffic. Marissa looked at me, half concerned, half stunned, and asked if this happened all the time. I told her no. This was, in fact, the grand finale, the ultimate meltdown I had been half expecting for weeks. We went back inside and finished bolting in the passenger seat while I gave her the extremely condensed version of the last 4 months. We took the Challenger out for a midnight test drive, just cruising down empty streets with the windows down and the engine rumbling with that deep, muscle car sound that never gets old. And I realized that Brielle was wrong about pretty much everything, but especially about one thing. She said she would forget me in a week, that she was practically already over me, back in her parents' living room on Christmas with that smug smile, like she had already won. But here we were, almost 3 months later, and she was the one who couldn't let go, the one who destroyed her own life trying to prove a point that didn't even make sense, the one who traded something stable for something temporary and then blamed everyone else when it fell apart. I never forgot her either, but not in the way she meant it, like a threat. I remembered her as a lesson about red flags, about financial boundaries, and about the importance of having friends like Evan, who document everything and tell you the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. The Challenger ran like a dream with the new seats. They were incredibly comfortable. Marissa and I went for breakfast at a 24-hour diner and talked about upgrading the brake system. Somewhere across town, Brielle was dealing with the consequences of her own choices, which honestly had nothing to do with me anymore. She wanted to be unforgettable. She wanted to be the one who walked away and moved on to something better. But instead, she became the very thing she accused me of being, forgettable, irrelevant, and stuck in the past, while everyone else moved on. Comment: I truly hope this story leaves you with a sense of clarity and strength. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is calmly walk away from a situation that no longer serves you. Setting firm boundaries is not an act of aggression. It is an act of self-preservation. Taking responsibility for your happiness and financial well-being is the foundation of true independence. Healing isn't just about waiting for time to pass. It's about actively building a new, better life for yourself. Remember to be kind to yourself throughout the process, because you deserve your own compassion. You will eventually realize that choosing your peace is more valuable than winning any argument. Surround yourself with people who contribute to your peace, not disrupt it. Your worth is not defined by anyone else's inability to see it. I wish you all the clarity and courage to build the peaceful life you deserve. If you liked it, don't forget to leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. See you in the upcoming stories.